leads to having to remind yourself that you're worthy of being here, that you're supposed to be here, that you should take up space, that you need to be here wearing this microphone.
Welcome in to She Scores, a Women in Sports focused podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Pearson. All right, welcome in to episode 2 of She Scores. Joining me today is Sloane Martin. Sloane is a broadcaster for BTN, Fox, NBC. She's also done some sideline reporting for the Minnesota Lynx, and I'm very honored to have her on today. So Sloane, welcome.
I appreciate the invite. Yeah, there's a lot going on, but always appreciate when I can connect with a Husker.
All right, the first question that I had for you is what made you realize that you wanted to work in sports?
Yeah, it was something that was very early on for me, an important goal, really, since I kind of peg it to maybe when I was 14 or 15 years old and really started watching sports on a regular basis. And then I saw other women like Pam Ward, Andrea Kramer, Lisa Salters, who really inspired me to want to be that trusted, authoritative presence that was really attractive to me. I had always been like the theater kid. I liked getting in front of other people. I wanted to be in the spotlight on camera. I had that kind of personality and draw, knew that I liked performing and talking to people and in front of people. But it was those kinds of women who I thought, I can see myself doing that. And that's why representation is so important, where you can see yourself in those spaces, in those shoes, and women who commanded so much respect because of how they did the job, the knowledge that they were bringing to viewers. So it was really easy to be like, hey, this is where I want to go. And then it was finally when I got to college, I went to a small Division III school where there were just more opportunities. We had simple 2-camera streaming webcasts at the time, and I was able to jump into play-by-play and realize, no, this is really it, that I didn't want to be pigeonholed or kind of labeled as a sideline reporter, which is kind of what happens to a lot of women who want to make that way through this industry, and just kind of worked from there, where I really wanted to see myself in that role and tried to ensure that happened. So it was a spark early on, and one many years in the making.
I think for me, I mean, obviously, I've been a huge sports fan my entire life. Growing up here in Nebraska, I wanted to be a Nebraska volleyball player initially. That's what sparked my interest in sports. But obviously, that didn't really work out. So then I was like, okay, how can I stay involved in sports in some way, shape, or form? And then it was when I got to high school, my senior year of high school, where they asked, hey, we want people to start broadcasting the games. Who's interested? And I immediately raised my hand. And I remember that very first football game, we were down like 50-0. It was not a good game, but I remember when we scored that first touchdown and just having that call, it clicked in me. I'm like, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And so then coming here in college, I've just been trying to do as much broadcasting as possible. And it's only grown my love for broadcasting.
If you can get through a 50-0 game and you have that spark
and that was just
desire, then you're doing the right thing.
And that was just the first quarter. Oh, man. So the world of sports broadcasting specifically, it's very male dominated. Have you had any challenges as a woman working in kind of a male dominated industry?
Yeah, I say the difference that we can come across is, the way I describe it is not getting the benefit of the doubt. Some people might call that, male privilege, where it's like your presence is expected here. It's not questioned. If you are a man who makes a mistake, then it's just a simple oversight or misspeaking. If a woman makes a mistake, you don't get that benefit of the doubt. It's because you don't know as much. It's because you're not prepared. It's because you're not supposed to be here for whatever reason. So that's what I really chalk it up to, is when someone walks into the press box and they say, hey, where's the play-by-play? And you say, you're looking at her right here. You got her. Because they don't assume that it's you in that position, in that booth, and you have to kind of reassert your presence. And then that leads to having to remind yourself that you're worthy of being here, that you're supposed to be here, that you should take up space, that you need to be here wearing this microphone, because sometimes it's those little things that can be a reminder of, oh wait, I'm not supposed to be here, or people don't think I'm supposed to be here. So I think it's hard to trace it to any specific moment, but it's kind of like those little things that can add up over time that you have to continually fight against, for sure. But I remember I got actually turned down for a football radio job at a very small radio station because they had assumed that I didn't know enough, that I wasn't knowledgeable enough to be there. And then I end up doing college football and national radio in 2022. So that was a nice full circle moment. But it really sometimes ends up being those small things and those small reminders of, there just is a really lacking bit of representation.
Yeah, I can really relate to that because I always feel like the need that whenever I'm on air, I always have to be perfect. I can't mess up. And then if I do mess up, I'm always afraid of, I'm waiting for that text like, oh, you did something wrong.
No, that's very much what it is. And sometimes that can hold you back a little bit because you feel like that you have to be perfect all the time, can't take risks. And sometimes, especially early on in your career, taking risks, that's how you find who you are and what feels good and who you are and finding that kind of voice. So it can take even longer to get to that spot you want in that development that you want, no matter how many reps you're getting.
And I also feel like we definitely I have to like, be very neutral and just straight facts. I feel like when the guys, they can kind of be a little more fun and outlandish, if you might say, because I remember one time there were these guys, they did some segment in between the game where they brought on oatmeal cream pies or something silly like that. And I'm
Mm.
like, there's no way that I would be allowed to do something like that. That would they for them it's like, oh, it's funny, but if I did something like that, it would be like, oh, you're not taking this seriously.
That's honestly a perfect example. And it takes, again, a while to get to that point where it's like, oh, well, under the right circumstances, the right broadcast, the right audience, the right game score, etc. That could be a really fun thing. I've had that happen too. Actually, I was on a broadcast. Again, this was National College Football too, where we had basically corn dog roulette where they were filled with different things. And it was just a surprise, whatever you got in there. And that's like what the broadcast wanted. That's what the management and leadership wanted, was a super fun broadcast. But you're exactly right, where I also fall into too that feeling of being all about the sport. So there's no question about that at all, that I can be trusted, that I take this seriously, that it's not just, I'm here for fun or here with my buddies, but that's exactly what I'm talking about. And when it comes to, just the benefit of the doubt and your intentions being there, your work ethic being there, being questioned potentially, where men don't necessarily have that, even if they're bringing out oatmeal cream pies on occasion.
The next question that I had for you, out of all the sports you've covered, you've done stuff for BTN, Fox, the Olympics. What would you say is your favorite moment that you've called in your career?
Gosh, that's a hard question, and it's fun to really think about that. But maybe it's just because it's still feeling quite fresh from the last, 2 months. But I would say the Olympics and Paralympics was kind of a bucket list item for me. Even if I never do it again, it will still be one of the greatest experiences I've ever had. Just the work that put in. I
Mhm.
started the beginning of May, and I was glued to my seat, to my chair. I felt like I was in graduate school or something with the amount of just studying and memorizing and researching that I was doing on a day in, day out basis to do sports and to narrate new people, new stories that I had never heard of before, international athletes and sports that I was not familiar with. So I think the feeling of accomplishment, putting that kind of work in, the Paralympics is where things kind of capped off, and following two Team USA teams in wheelchair basketball on their journey to the gold medal game, a historic run by the USA men's team to win three straight, and just such a likable group to follow that you just fall in love with, the kind of team that this is, the players that they are.
Mhm.
16 games over 11 days, a lot of work. I think that is going to be hard to top because, especially being, the first time as well, not knowing what to expect going in, being away from home for, a total of, gosh, 6 weeks, over 8 total. It was something that was extremely satisfying, extremely fun, and something that I'll always remember.
Yeah, definitely something on my bucket list is to broadcast the Olympics. So
Mhm.
what is it like kind of, you mentioned preparing for sports that you're really not familiar with. Kind of what is that process like? Because, you did sports like, archery and like synchronized swimming. How do you go about preparing for sports like that you may have never really paid attention to before?
Yeah, that's something that's really an important part of this job. I mean, there's some people certainly who find that one niche and they are a baseball broadcaster and they follow that path from beginning to end and just kind of stay in that lane. I think I've always tried to really kind of build myself, brand myself, if you will, as someone who's very versatile. I also have a background in news reporting. It wasn't until 2021 that I was able to make the leap financially to do this full time. So that's a solid 10 years that I was a full-time news reporter. So I like having that diversified background and think news reporting actually really taught me more than anything about how to walk into something brand new. I had no idea about state budgets. For example, here in Minnesota, they're called bienniums because they're every 2 years. So having to report on things like trials in the legal system to state politics, things that I was really not incredibly embedded with and very familiar with, but having to make it digestible for people, including myself, was a really great learning process to be able to jump into anything unfamiliar. So when I, for the Olympics, am assigned shooting sports and artistic swimming, not synchronized swimming anymore as of a couple years ago, but same sport. But things that I had never been a part of before. Synchronized artistic swimming is a great example as well because it was a completely different rhythm. I had never done kind of a performance sport like that or a judge sport before. For me, it had always been head-to-head competition and what that looks like. So what is the timing of that? How much do I need to talk versus my color person? So those were things I had to really kind of estimate in my mind. And it was really kind of flipping a switch going from shooting, which you have very exciting short bursts of competition versus artistic swimming, which gives you a lot more wiggle room to discuss things. You're not breaking down every single move at the time. So it was a very different change of pace. I would say the process for me, and this even started with hockey I had never done before, never played growing up. Volleyball was the same thing too. Was not familiar with the sport until I got assigned it 2 years ago. And then last year being my first full season doing volleyball with Big Ten Network. And of course, it's one of the greatest sports that draws the most viewers behind football and men's basketball statistically on the network. So put a lot of pressure on myself. And really, it comes to being a student. I say that so much of my job is being a student. It's not just the Olympics and Paralympics where I'm chained to my chair and just forcing myself to study and read and memorize all day. That's really what it is on a season in and season out basis for me, whether it's new or not. But when it is new, I watch a ton. I watch other broadcasters. I watch the sport as much as possible. First, to understand the rhythm, to understand the vocabulary that is needed, and just the timing of it too. When you need to go to your color person, volleyball can be pretty cut and dry because you have a point and you talk about the point, but you're not saying everything happening that's going on, especially for a TV audience. But hockey is much different. It's a much different rhythm because you don't know at all when they're going to score. The puck and the players are constantly moving. So really getting a feel for how that works. And then it's just the reps that come with it. You have a basis of what you expect from yourself, how you perform. You just have to make those tweaks to be able to make it, really palatable and fun and entertaining to that new audience and gain their respect.
Yeah, volleyball, that's always been my sport. I, played it
Mm.
from when I was really little all the way through high school. And that's my big goal someday. I want to call volleyball and BTN. So getting to talk about that is definitely exciting.
Oh, that's a great niche to have. It's a sport that continues to grow. But it's funny too when it comes to doing things that are new. I actually have a couple of notes on my phone of different sports. And sometimes it's just vocab words or certain words that I want to make sure I kind of have at the tip of my tongue. Basketball is a second language to me. It is something that is so inherent to me. So when I do other sports or like hockey that I only do a couple times a year, I'll revisit that to just make sure it's fresh in my mind. And I just had it in my phone for years now that I will just revisit every time I get into that season to make sure I'm nice and fresh.
What would you say is your favorite part about working in sports?
It's hard to say anything other than just the game and the moment. I enjoy the entire process of it. And if you're going to do this, you better enjoy the process too, which is, again, to make that comparison with being a student, I treat every single game that I have like it's a test. Um, and that's how I'm studying for it, with getting my notes, reading, researching, watching interviews, conducting interviews, reading local news, listening to podcasts, wherever I can find any bit of information in addition to the one-on-one access that we're able to get. I want to paint as broad and specific of a picture as possible to be the most accurate to our audience, to tell them about the circumstances of this team, this season, this matchup, the importance, the significance, why it matters to people. And you need information to do that. Of course, when we're doing this, it's also seeing what's happening in front of us, being in the game, on top of the play and what's going on. But when you don't have that additional narrative context to go along with it, you're failing to tell the entire story, because
Mhm.
things that will happen will have derivations in that previous context and history that goes along with it. So when you're able to make those connections, that's what's really going to fill out the broadcast as best as possible. You can be the best kind of game announcer, but if you don't have the rest to flush it out,
Mhm.
then you're not hitting every mark that you could for the audience and for the people and parties involved in this game too. So for me, nothing, even if I am exhausted, I already in November looking at a couple of 3 games in a row. I've done 5 games in 6 days. And even when you feel completely tired, I know that once I sit down there and once the mic turns on, that's just where I am. And that's where I am present. And that's where I feel happiest. And you think about nothing else except that moment right in front of you and trying to prepare for what could be coming. But just your own, working with someone that you hopefully like as well too. I feel very lucky that I just get along so well and I'm friends outside of work with so many of my partners in various sports that I'm doing. So it is that moment that certainly makes it all worth it, that I look forward to, even if I feel like kind of in a slog right now or it's been a tough week. That's what makes it worth it.
Yeah, and definitely that being that person that, brings the excitement to everyone, because, not everyone can go to the games in person. So being able to be that person that can kind of make them feel like they're in the arena when you're there, the one calling the game.
No, that's absolutely what it is. And making that connection with the audience, it's, fun and to think about. And I've also been, the national perspective, that's what I do right now, but I've also been a team broadcaster as well. And just that feeling of connecting with people over something that you both share and love and are excited about, that's also part of it.
Out of all the games that you have called, what would you say is that moment where you're like, I've made it?
Gosh, that's an interesting question because I don't ever think of myself that way at all. And this is going to sound very much like an athlete answer. And for that, I
I know, I
apologize.
know, I know you played.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yes. So for me, it is a rent, the rent is due every day. There's no kind of like coasting or, it's hard for me even to kind of go up the rungs of the ladder and take the time to look behind me or around next to me to see, where you've surpassed and at what point you are. It's always just been head forward and grinding to the next thing. I think I've gotten better over the last couple of years to appreciate, where my hard work has gotten me, because it has been a long journey and it's been a hard journey. I'm not someone who was just given a dream role right
mhm.
off the bat by any means. It has completely been hustle and grind to get to this point, and determination with kind of a single focus mindset that I've had. But to be honest, you just never know when things could change. A lot of people, including myself, are freelancers that I get
Mhm.
paid. My income is game to game. Um, and you never know when things could change or be different or when that load is different. So for me, it's always that kind of looking forward to the future mentality, appreciating where that hard work is. I'm a homeowner and we just built a garage, very adult, fun things that we have to deal with, but I suppose an accomplishment in itself. But I think at this point, like I would say, it is very much a rent is due every day, every game kind of mindset.
Yeah, I can really relate to that mindset because, especially here in college, I've always been nose to the grindstone trying to just get as many reps as possible. But I think, really, especially this year, since it's my last year, I really just kind of tried to take a step back and really reflect on, like, okay, you've gotten to do a lot. And just one moment that really stuck out to me was just this past semester when I was the first time getting to do play by play on BTN Plus. Nebraska softball. Billy Andrews, she tied the all-time career home run record for the Huskers, and I got to be the one to call that. So that was just a really cool moment. And then when it was posted on, all the Nebraska social media pages, and I'm like, oh, that's my voice behind that. That was kind of that moment where I'm like, okay, this is really cool.
Yes, no, that's fantastic. And that's the difference when you have that moment and feeling like, oh, this is why it's so important what I do, that it's not for me. And it's fun to hear your voice, but it's like that's also for Billy and that's also for her family and for, the Husker community to really remember that moment by. So that's a very cool one to have.
Are there any role models that you have had as you have progressed through the industry, people that you've kind of looked up to?
Yeah, that's a very important question. And, I mentioned a couple earlier on. I would say when I was younger, Pam Ward, who was such a pioneer in play-by-play. In fact, she just got done doing the WNBA semifinals, and she is a wonderful person. Beth Mowins as well. She is someone who has also broken down so many barriers doing NFL games and everywhere that she's been, being so well respected, the biggest games that she's assigned to. That's someone who you look up to very much. And I've had the pleasure of meeting her too. Lisa Byington at Big Ten
Mm-hmm.
Network, being the first woman to be an NBA broadcaster. The NBA was my passion early on when I was a teen. And you just didn't think you could see it happening until it happens. And she was the perfect woman to do that. Kate Scott is someone who's become, a friend of mine here online, the play-by-play broadcaster of the 76ers. So to have this kind of community of people has been so wonderful, and to support each other, to know what this journey is like and to be rooting for each other, but also recognizing women who have come before me too have started to break down those barriers. There's still more to be done, but just so appreciative of the work of those women who I just mentioned. And then even for the sideline perspective, who I mentioned early on, Lisa Salters, Andrea Kramer, Susie Colbert, those are some that immediately come to mind for me. Even my own agent, Alex Flanagan, who used to be a reporter for NBC Sports and did Notre Dame football and a lot of big games there too. When you have people to look to see yourself
Mm-hmm.
in those shoes, to say, hey, I can command the same respect, I can have this presence, I can get these interviews, relay this information in a professional, fun, entertaining manner. That's when you're able to really accelerate yourself too. So there's been a lot of people who have laid the groundwork at this point.
Yeah, I think for me, Lisa Byington, as someone who wants to be a broadcaster, she's definitely someone I've looked up to. You have, as some, like, I want to do volleyball and like softball and BTN, so you're definitely someone I've really looked up to, and it's just really cool to like turn on the TV and hear that voice and be able to think, oh, maybe I can be there someday too.
No, that's exactly right. And I appreciate you saying that because it does make a difference. And you never know who is listening, and it just normalizes hearing a woman's presence on sports, whether it's men's or women's or anything else, where it becomes a regular thing. And that's what we want.
Obviously, the sports media industry, the hours can get really long. It can get maybe a little stressful at times. How do you deal with kind of, that when the hours are getting really long and just things are really, there's a lot going on. How do you kind of deal with that?
Boy, I wish I knew, because my work-life balance is horrible and I have no
Same.
shame in saying that at all. And it's one of those things that I think I have just accepted about myself. And I have always been a very driven, a very ambitious person. Um, and my husband, this is another part of this too, where I also have a spouse who has seen this entire journey as an extremely supportive and extremely invested in it as well. So I never feel like I'm pulling myself up every single day when things are tough, or when, I'm just doing a little bit too much. To have that kind of support is extremely, extremely important in my life and in the development of my career. But I try and do things like get on my bike, go outside, like It sounds bad, but having to remember to take care of yourself,
Hmm.
especially on the road, it can be hard. The number of Starbucks or Brugger's bagels, actually, I don't think they have those in Nebraska,
I
but
don't think so.
breakfast sandwiches, things like that, like you just live off of most of the year, but just trying to make sure to take care of yourself, to have a really fulfilling, nutritious meal, to get good sleep. I do a good job of that, prioritizing sleep for sure. But I would say that I enjoy it this way. I like being busy. I like working hard. I love just kind of holding myself to that standard, pushing myself. I still am a very competitive person that has never really left me from my Division 3 baller days, but I have just realized that's kind of who I am. Sometimes I have to take a step back, but there are other times where it's like, all right, we just got to get through this week. There's not going to be much time. Um, and then you try and make up for it. Give yourself, I don't want to say work hard, play hard. It's not really a mantra of mine, but I do believe in recovery. Like athletes
Hmm.
believe in recovery too. So you have those spurts where you're really pushing hard, but maybe, tonight you relax and watch some dumb show I'm watching now is like Halloween Wars on the Food Network. But like we just enjoy it and it's mindless and it's fun. So trying to integrate some of those things too when you can.
Yeah, I can really relate to that because I feel like, especially, in college, you're like trying to do as much as you possibly can. And I remember like last semester, like when the state tournaments rolled around, I would always be doing like every single game, or it'd be like the day before and they'd be like, oh, we need help. And I'd always be the one to like raise my hand and say that I can help out. And definitely with like the state tournaments, because, you would be doing 15 games in like a span of 4 days. So, it definitely got to be a lot. And that's something I really tried to take into, especially coming into my last year of college. I'm like, you know what, Sarah, you can take a step back. You don't need to do everything. Just you can do some, but just take that step back and take that time for yourself. Because I want to enjoy my last year of college too, and everything else that comes along with it too.
No, that's a very good point. You have to have, that balance, but at the same time, you're doing the right thing of trying to say yes to everything that you can. You never know what connections you're going to make. And, it's so different than just kind of sending your tape out to people as opposed to working with them completely and seeing the entire process. They see how you work, they see how you react to other people, how you are to work with. So you're doing the right thing, but totally understand wanting to take in as much, big red festivities you can.
Especially as someone who's always, I grow up a diehard Husker fan. Like when I'm not
Mm.
working the games, I love being right in the front row, screaming my head off. So the world of like the sports media industry, it's really competitive, really tough to get into. How do you make yourself stand out amongst everybody else?
Well, you want to be able to say, and this is something that I've really thought for a very long time, it's that it is your work more than anything. It is how you are to work with. It is the depth of effort you put in to every single broadcast, which I think is always going to be apparent as a casual listener or someone who's extremely invested. I want someone who is a diehard Husker fan when I do a women's basketball game there to feel like, hey, this is someone who I can trust, who really knows she may not be local, but just someone who really understands Husker women's basketball, for example. And that's how I approach every national opportunity that I get, which is, the bulk of my income now, except for when I'm doing Minnesota Lynx. So for me, it has always been being able to rest on this is the job. And this is when I see, Sarah, a little bit of a transformation where I feel like a lot of young broadcasters now are also social media content creators, for example, where it's a day in the life, where it is putting up your calls, where it's filming yourself. That is maybe a little bit of a harder mindset for me to get into because again my top priority is always going to be the work, and maybe it's a lot easier for folks, I hate to age myself, but a lot easier for younger folks when you can just turn around to TikTok really quickly. But it's interesting to see younger people marketing themselves and trying to get themselves out to a much wider audience by using social media, specifically Instagram and TikTok, I think, to be able to get those calls out to people. So I think that's an interesting thing. For me, it's been a slow climb where I have just kind of gone up each rung of the ladder and continue to kind of steadily make that progress. In 2020, I was able to get an agent. So then you kind of have someone on your side, someone who can get your name into other rooms. But it took a great deal of work to be able to get to that point too. So for me, I think the greatest answer I can give, just doing the best work possible every single time you're given the opportunity. Have that be your reputation, I should say. And that's not to say that going the social media route, that there's anything wrong with that by any means. It actually seems quite successful. But I think it's always going to come down to who you are and how you work and how much you're willing to work.
Yes, definitely. I think that, especially within sports, going up that ladder is really common for a lot of people. You're not just going to get the big dream job right away. You kind of got to start down here and work your way up to the big top.
No, that's very much what it is. And people want to skip some rungs. Some people are able to, but that's a pretty rare occurrence.
What is some advice that you would maybe have for a young woman who is looking to kind of break into the sports broadcasting industry?
The way I think of it as when you are in a space, even if it's women's sports, even if you're working with other women too, there still is that realization that not many people are doing this. So my biggest piece of advice is to take up space, literally and figuratively. Demand that you are supposed to be there. I shouldn't say that. Shouldn't say demand that you're supposed to be there to adults, but I mean also mentally and internally. And when you're there, that you're supposed to, and tell yourself that at all times, that you are deserving of this role, deserving to put the headset on, that you've put the work in, that you are a likable person in presence to all kinds of sports fans, and they're going to enjoy your broadcast because of the work that you put in. But I think that would boil it down to take up space, because you can't just assume people are going to hand opportunities out to you. You also have to try and put yourself out there as well,
Mhm.
too, reaching out to people in higher positions to say, this is what I'm thinking. This is where I see myself. That's really how I was able to find this path in play-by-play, because I said early on, this is where I want to be. I don't want to be put anywhere else. I want to be in this lane, in this role, doing play-by-play. So I should say it's not to be forceful or demanding of other people. It's really more of an internal mindset where you can be that driven person and know that you're supposed to be in that role.
Yeah, that's something that I have really tried doing as of late, because obviously these last 4 years, I've done a lot. I've not that I'm not trying to be selfish or anything, but I would say I've worked pretty hard. It was just like maybe a couple months ago, I went into my professor and I was finally, I'm like, finally, I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm like, hey, I've been working really hard these last 4 years. I've always wanted to do BTM plus and I hadn't yet gotten to be able to do that. And I went in, I'm like, hey, I really believe I'm deserving of this opportunity. Like, I've worked really hard these last 4 years. I really, really appreciate if you could give me this chance. And I think it finally paid off after all these 4 years of grinding, because Thursday night, I'm actually making my sideline debut for BTM Plus.
Nice. That's fantastic. And that's what it takes, is when you have the reps, you have the basis of the work, and then you ask for it too. That's the combination right there.
Really, any tips for that? Because I'm a little bit nervous about that.
Oh, don't be
Uh,
at all. I would say it's just knowing what stories you want to tell, being over prepared so you
mhm.
are ready for anything, that you're ready to contribute to the broadcast in any way possible. So maybe you only get 3 hits in a game, but you came prepared with 9 different story ideas to come into, because you don't know what the narrative of the game is going to require. So that's what I think is a really good place to start, being over prepared whenever you can.
I think that was all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything else that you would like to add to kind of like wrap things up here?
No, just say that, available, DMs open if there, any women like yourself who are interested in this field, who want to chat or anything else like that, because it's important to have that kind of community in doing something like this, because it's not always easy, even though you think you're working in sports. And yes, we're playing in a sandbox too, but there's a lot of other circumstances involved as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciated having you on, and it was great to get to know you.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been She Scores. Thank you for listening. Tune in Mondays at noon to hear from more women changing the game.